It's Shirley with Spirit of Matter, broadcasting to you from New Maui, which is previously Israel and or Palestine. But I believe the name New Maui is the most compatible for what will be from this region. So honoring Maui, honoring the people who told us to not obey, even when we didn't understand what they're talking about. And everybody who raises awareness to Agenda 2030, the farmers in Netherlands, and everybody who is dealing with atrocity. Much love to the region of Ukraine and Russia that have been going through this and are still going through this. Much love to the region of Syria and Rojava at this time. This is a Mercury day, moon hour, with moon on the 24th degree of Gemini, in a bit of a T-square here with Neptune and Venus, which is supposed to be resolved around my midheaven. So this is why I'm broadcasting, I guess. Saturn ruling the ascendant in the second house, conjuncting the ascendant in 28 degrees Aquarius, with Saturn in 0 degrees Pisces, just a few days before Saturn becomes direct. So all things Saturn in Pisces are, coming to a halt, working very slowly, but just in a few days we're going to have a direct movement and we'll be able to get in line to, whether it's tending to the structure of our feet, our nails, our legs, our life path, depending on what's there for you. And the midheaven is Jupiter ruled, with Jupiter in the 4th house in Taurus, retrograde. Mars is slowly separating from this opposition to Jupiter. Mercury, the ruler of the day, is in the 9th house. This 10th house already. Yeah, the 10th house in Scorpio. So still inquisitive, still deep. Separating from the opposition to Jupiter and applying to oppose Uranus, where Mars will kind of join it, and then we'll have the new moon joining it. Or first we have the new moon and then we will have Mars and the sun joining it. So there's a lot going on still on the Scorpio-Taurus axis. And Venus is on the 22nd degree of Virgo. Previously today, the moon was tightly squaring it. I have a bit of an anecdote about this. A Facebook friend of mine did a constellation therapy, and the statue that she prepared of Ishtar basically fell to the ground and was broken with her mouth kind of open. Being frustrated that she's not being listened to, okay? And this is very symbolic of what's going on with the Ishtar Venus archetype. Okay, Venus is ruling Ketu. She's no longer ruling Rahu, but Venus on the 22nd degree is the degree of to kill and be killed. There's great awareness today, particularly today, into the role of women in all the atrocities. And yes, Ketu is in a Venus sign, okay? But we also need to understand that there are things preceding what we see now. We see the situation in Afghanistan gotten so worse that women literally just in the recent years, in recent year even, are suddenly unable to go to the park, unable to listen to any sort of music, not even just by women, is not allowed, and they mainly are supposed to stay at home. And we also have seen this in Iran, okay? LGBTQ people speaking up, women speaking up, but being slaughtered basically for being women, okay? It's a genocide, it's any genocide. And we saw this too prior to the 7th of October. If you have been watching Tessaloniki, who travels not only in Israel and Palestine, but around the world, but he also travels to those places where we can't really make it and goes undercover. So he showed Jenin, he showed the West Bank, he showed Hawara, Nablus, all these regions, and none of these places had women outside. None of these places had pride flags. Okay, so if we were to think, is Palestine closer to Rojava or to Afghanistan? Unfortunately, it's closer to Afghanistan, but this is not where it ends. We saw even during COVID, the atrocities against women in Ukraine and Russia war, and there were actually demonstrations of women around this. And even in Israel before 7th of October, women began to fear going to public transportation in central Israel. Okay, we literally had, even in my region, I remember women and even some great men drivers were physically defending the right of women to sit where they want. Okay, which is inconceivable. Israel is a secular country, and so much so that the ultra-Orthodox were considered Fifth Legion by a Zionist regime, and it was born with the full right to vote by women in 1948, which was new back then. But unfortunately, we saw that there is regression. Okay, suddenly LGBTQ rights were more and more violated, women's rights were more and more violated, and this was done also by secular people. Okay, there were atrocities against women also by secular societies. I can't say this is because of orthodoxy or fundamentalism per se, but also happening in secular society. And even the Nova Party, which was the 7th of October slaughter, which now is almost invisible against the atrocities that were done towards Palestinian civilians. And in certain ways, it's understandable. In other ways, it's like, hey, you really have forgotten 2,500 dead and at least 1,400 people slaughtered in the most brutal ways within Israel. And it seemed to be like forgotten. Okay, so it's like yes, this too is happening, and the people who were targeted at the Nova Party were men and women, secular men and women, partying together, dancing together in a nature party in the Nova. They were particularly targeted because they believed that their faith is pro-peace. Okay, so this is something that has been ongoing, and we see it happening on a mundane level. We have the question of autonomy, which is raw in Aries, and we have the question of what would this new political entity look like. Okay, if we talk about Rojava in Syria, which I talked about, and I predict when Lilith arrives, the situation of Venus right now, Venus in the 22nd degree, when Lilith arrives, the 22nd degree of Virgo, it would be the Lilith return for Rojava. And I have an episode about Rojava when I talk about astrological considerations for electing time for declarations of independence. Then this is the Rojava case, a very important episode that I think everybody should listen to, and very important country that we should be looking at to see what's right there, what's wrong there, and how to improve on that, because this is probably where we are heading if we are to sustain ourselves. So we have these nationalism questions like liberate the region, the country, or is Palestine or Taiwan or Crimea or Texas, and then side by side we have the question of what would these entities look like? Would they look more like Rojava, or would they look like Afghanistan when they were left to their own devices, which literally abolished women? And this is something that I want to also talk about on the alchemical level. Okay, before I go into the Star of David, and I don't even know what I'll see there, but which is Friday, just this Friday, on an alchemical level, okay. And I want to begin actually with Mercury. Okay, this is not a man, not a woman. Mercury rules trade, rules children, but it also rules the doorway between states. Okay, for example, from going to being oppressed or occupied to liberation. Okay, the transition phase is Mercury. Mercury is the door in which you step to another world when a person leaves the physical existence. Mercury is called a psychopomp, basically guarding the doorways out of your physical being. When you enter a house, so the doorway, and I'm standing next to an entrance between my living room and kind of like my porch when I'm talking about it. So the doorway, the fenster, okay, the window is Mercury. Mercury also rules, like I said, children. And now we begin to have this connection between the process of going from one state, let's say occupied, to another state, let's say independent, goes through Mercury, and Mercury is also children. Okay, so we see in many places the children are being trafficked, children are being used in guerrilla, children are being used basically as means to try to liberate political entities, but while children do have the ability to be playful, to try new things, to go into the spirit of play without thinking much and thus be successful, but also not to take it too harsh when there's, if you work as an adult with children, then, if a child fell and got like really, really serious bruise, you hug them, you hold them, you validate them, and then you also bring in another thing to their attention, and they change their emotional state. Okay, quite often they need to feel powerfully, but also change their emotional state quite often. And a part of it is Mercury there. And so when we use actual children, not the quality of children, which is being playful, doing tricks, because to liberate yourself, you need to do some tricks. Okay, you need to be a trickster. But when we use actual children, we are basically harming that which the ruler of transitioning from one state to another is ruling. So misuse or abuse of children basically makes the transition phase more difficult. And so both by kidnapping children or by bombing children, the result, and I'm not speaking here in judgment because I'm not a general, okay? But I'm speaking in the result of the action is that the change from, let's say, war to peace or occupation to independence is becoming more difficult when we use children in these ways, okay? In Negev region, children are also used to rape women and children within Israel, okay? It's just so that you will know. And this is, after I've talked about children, and I hope I emphasize that to transition between one state to another state, you need the passage to be clear, and treating children well and allowing them freedom, allowing childhood. This is also why marrying children, like child marriage, is not good, because basically this transitional phase of adolescence is very important for the transition to be completed. And if we cut into this and we have forced marriage, okay, then we basically are creating trouble and creating a situation where we can't really complete the transition from one phase to another. So child marriage, if you are in a situation or a community that is occupied, that is a colonialized, that is in apartheid type of situation around the world, okay, like racial segregation and stuff like that, then first thing is very important to treat children well, not to attempt to send children to be troops, because what you want is the quality of the child, okay, to be curious, to be cunning, to be playful, but not to send actual children. Abolish child marriages, abolish any type. You cannot go in the roundabout and a trickery way about it. You cannot, okay, you cannot. No time. You have to abolish those things within your society, that liberate this, that keep the society from being liberated, okay? Abolish child marriages, because if you don't have anything, if children are treated well and they have adolescence and they're not expected to work, okay, and they're not expected to fight, okay, then when they have childhood, this means that if you want to have a change in your society, if your society is dealing with occupation, with apartheid, with colonialism, with any type of oppression or even tyrannical regime, then if you abolish it within the society from within, okay, if you do not allow it, as families, you do not allow it, you're basically creating childhood, and you basically are opening the gate to be in a different state, that is to be free. Also, people who will need to cross over, will be easier for them probably to cross over. Okay, this is the power of Mercury. And every, Mercury is connected with Hermes, is connected with Jehuti or thought, is connected with Marilyn, is connected with anything that is of a psychopomp, kind of ushering people from the living into the dead. So you probably have your own equivalent of that. But in the physical, it is children. And so children must have childhood. They cannot marry, okay, before adolescence, regardless of the gender, regardless if they're menstruating. Menstruation is not adolescence, okay? Menstruation is dictated by many things, like the food that we eat, what's in the water, is it polluted, is it toxic, and so on and so forth, and many other things. So just receiving menstrual blood does not mean that somebody is an adolescent. That's very important. And that is the first step to just clear the path. You want to have a change in society, clear the doorway to that other side. You're occupied, clear the doorway to that other side. Treat children well. Don't marry them forcibly. And this is something, wherever it happens, you see that eventually, okay, when it happens to children, when it happens to women, it will happen to men. C'est tout. I want to tell you also, in the Negev region where I live, okay, Arab Israel is not even Palestinians. People of our, culture, just Arabs. So they have traditions where they, in order to get land, they need to have more than one woman, because they would get more land. And this is a problem with the Israeli regime that only recently thought to change it. And the thing is that they would marry forcibly. And sometimes the brides would be very young. And if the women did not want this, or escaped, or were mistreated, if they did not have a father who would stand up to the family, or somebody to protect them, they would be slaughtered and buried in the dunes of sand in the Negev, okay? And only when I was working on with Sedna was I exposed to this, and it's something that basically a lawyer that I know heard from her clients, and the client was like, do you know how many girls are buried in the sand in the Negev? Like, come on. And that lawyer was like shocked, because she wasn't aware of that. And so this was happening for years and years and years, and still happening. And then after a while, also LGBTQ people began to be murdered, and eventually men started getting murdered, sometimes 100 men in a month. And this is not by Israel, this is not by anybody other than internally had crime organizations fighting themselves. Maybe 100 men in a month, Arab Israeli men murdered for no reason. Okay, so it took years until it happened, and unfortunately, only when those Arab Israeli men were murdered, now everybody was demonstrating how come the violence in our society, and the Israelis don't do anything, and they don't help us. Where were you when all these girls were murdered? Okay, so now it's not impossible to raise awareness, because when you repent and when you change things, you get results. But the thing is that it took a lot of time. But first, the children and women were being hurt, and then the men were being hurt. And it took a lot of while until it got into this situation, because you're given chances to correct this. But then it got a situation that 100 Arab Israeli men were being murdered within and within their community, okay? Not about occupation. They were not Palestinians necessarily. They were not murdered by Jews, okay? It was just within the society that was happening. And so how would Israel respond to that? Because if Israel would respond to that, Israel would be blamed in military occupation of the Negev region, which is what made it also quite difficult to tend to that, because we would have to put our military there, and that it would be military occupation of the Negev region, okay? This is genuinely what we're dealing with. And so, even within Israel, prior to the 7th of October, women suddenly were not free to be in public transportation in secular central Israel. There was violence against women in public, okay? And all kinds of atrocities that made Israel weak and susceptible to being invaded. And of course, it was planned for 20 years. There is 2013. All is true. But there is also what makes us susceptible and what makes us abolish, whether slavery or apartheid or segregation or invasion. Okay? So one of the elements I spoke about was children. There was the story of the Yemenite children abduction that was happening by the Help Care. And these children were abducted from their families and were subjected to medical experiments, to trafficking, and to like whatnot. It's not only Yemeni children, but this case was exposed after 50 years. Prior to the 7th of October, they covered up the story of the kidnapped Yemeni children. Okay, internal Israel. Okay. So prior to the invasion, which was horribly successful, of whichever people it was planned, there was a lot not being done in favor of children or to keep children. And people did not believe that this is not only happening with Yemeni children, okay? Social workers were literally calling me a conspiracy theorist when I talked about something which I thought they are aware of, and that is that amongst the community of people who survived trauma, there are people who were survivors of these children. And those who did want to get out of their abusive families were turned forcibly back, whereas other cases, the children were taken forcibly from their families, and usually because one of the parents dealt with a certain trauma and the child was basically abducted instead of assisting the parent. And literally, social workers thought it was a conspiracy theory. So you can understand how that can very quickly escalate to allowing of kidnapping thousands of people, women, men, elderly, and youth, and children, and infants. Okay, there are infants who were kidnapped in the 7th of October. So this is the internal process. And the next part of it is Venus, which is women, sisters, and the land. Okay. And this is really about, I'll tell you a story. I was beginning to work the soil, and except for being a teenager, I never had available land to work. So I'm not owner of the land, but I have some land here that I can work. And I was trying to dig in, and literally my wombs told me, like, would you do that like with me? And I was like, what the fuck? And apparently I was just told like to spill water so that the soil becomes muddy, and then I can shape the soil. And that was like, oh shit. Okay. And this is how the land, the soil, the fertility of the soil is Venus Taurus. Okay, this is Venus. And so it's both about learning how to work the soil, is treating the soil well, which we all have a process of learning, okay, but also about how to treat women, because if we kiss the soil 5 times a day, but we mistreat women, we are kept in a blind spot where we can't get the fertility of the land. And also, if you want land, then like you got to know what to do with it, right? You have to contribute to the fertility of the soil, and learn about this, and then you can have land. And this is something that's known for years, that if something is happening, if a place is occupied in the sense of land invasion, then we need to think about how did we treat the people on the land. It's both about inclusivity, were we being inclusive to people, okay, and how did we treat our women and sisters, okay, women and sisters, because this is Venus and this is the land. Here we want the mandate of the land. We need to both treat the land well and treat women and sisters well. Needless to say, that in a society where you don't see women outside, where you can't hear a woman singing, and that was happening a lot in our neighbors, then that means that slowly but surely you are losing land. You're losing the fertility of the land, and then you're losing land, literally. This is occupation, this is invasion, this is besieging cities. And in Israel, as we began to mistreat women under the guise of both secularism and fundamentalism, okay, it's happening in all courses of society, we began to lose land fertility, and eventually we began to lose land. Okay, we're literally invaded as a country. And you can say 2013, Schwab, all of this is true. Betrayal from within. Okay, the end result was that we mistreated women, treated them a little better, but then we retreated back to mistreated women, and then we basically retreated back to tending to the land, which means we lost land, we got invaded as a country, okay? And unfortunately, during this invasion, women were still mistreated. So during this invasion, basically, elderly people, which is Saturn, is the Lord of Time. This is one of the really most horrid things that you can do, because Mars and Venus, they have cycles. You can correct mistakes with Mars and Venus rather easily. But Saturn, it is a slow-moving planet, okay? So not tending to the elderly. And in Israel, there are people who survived the Holocaust and were starving in Israel at the time of 7th of October, okay? So you can understand how depriving people and treating them, basically keeping them starving, even though they're Holocaust survivors, and treating our elderly in such a way that they are in poverty. We made and chronically doing so, we made a very, very bad mistake as a country, because this is our longevity as a country. Okay, what Kissinger said is what Kissinger said, but it won't come to fruition if we are actually tending to what we need to tend to. Okay, we have power within this. We have power, both to the 2030 agenda, both to whatever secret societies, both to whatnot, okay? We all have a point of interference and power to do something in terms of the world. And so when we're treating our children wrong, treating our women wrong, treating our elderly wrong, we're basically losing the transitions, okay, the ability to go through transitions and changes. And Israel is going through tremendous changes with Uranus on its sun. The land itself, the fertility of the soul, as well as having land, and the longevity of the country, okay? Longevity. If you want longevity, we need to treat elderly people well, because then we will have longevity, okay? It doesn't mean that we don't hold them accountable. It just means that we provide for our elders, and we treat them fairly, okay? So this is indeed a tremendous disaster from within that allowed whether it was betrayal or invasion or global conspiracy, it allowed more and more power to that global conspiracy. And when people say this is conspiracy theory, when you talk about children being kidnapped, when a woman complains that she had gone through sexual harassment, and a person said, well, my sister and mother didn't, so you were probably targeted for your opinions, that literally, you just literally justify sexual harassment in political conflict. And those things were happening even today. Okay, I literally ran into such a story on Twitter. So this is how we begin to literally lose land. So when you talk about losing land to apartheid or to segregation, and I talked about the Mandela story, literally Nelson Mandela liberated Africa from apartheid by marrying a woman from another tribe, so biodiversity, standing up to the monarchy, so creating the changes and standing up to tyranny from within, and preserving and encouraging the values that people call communist, but are actually sharing and caring in society, so assisting each other in society, being inclusive as a society. That itself abolished any type of apartheid, because what is apartheid? Is a segregation based on your bloodline. That was existing within Africa, and Mandela was smart enough to see it and change it from within, and so apartheid by white people became obsolete, and so apartheid was abolished. Okay, it took long, it was a fated, it was an eclipse person. You can watch the astrology podcast discussing also Mandela in the eclipses episode. So it was very fated for the world to happen, but we can also create such fatedness by learning from it. And if we compare Palestine to Rojava, we compare between a society that was founded by a legion of armed women freeing the land and maintaining women's rights, LGBTQ rights, and decentralization of a regime way before Pluto even thought about visiting Aquarius. Okay, so I'm not saying this is heaven, but they definitely abolished a lot of the internal intrigues that could have kept the Kurd community or the Kurd line, I don't know, and they have a lot of biodiversity, they have a lot of ethnical origins within Rojava. So they abolished from within any argument against the liberation of Kurds. How would Kurdish women feel? They're armed and willing to protect themselves, and they have equal qualities. How would LGBTQ feel in Kurd land? Well, they have full rights. What about tyrannical oppression? Well, we have decentralization, and there are different communities that live as different tribes, and we are organized as these communities. Well, what about individual rights? I don't know, like you would need to tell me. There's a lot more to learn. But there's just so many things that were abolished, whether it's mistreating children, mistreating women, LGBTQ being at risk, okay, that there was really no longer excuse to keep these Kurds country from being emancipated, okay? And you can see that Israel also got its independence with the Declaration of Independence that was at least setting an intention to not differentiate between sex, gender. 1948, the word gender was said alongside with the word sex or gender. Okay? Religion, race, sex, or gender. Do you understand what you're hearing? This is LGBTQ rights. In 1948, the Declaration of Independence of Israel, we understand how Israel got the mandate of the alchemized forces to emancipate itself. And we also understand in this contract what retracts Israel from maintaining that mandate. Okay, if we retract on LGBTQ rights, we retract on women's rights, if we become transphobic, even so, then we basically are slowly losing our mandate of existing in the world as a political entity. That was the contract, that was the Declaration of Independence. When in the United States, homeless settlements by tents were evacuated forcibly and turned into concentration camps, and the journalists who were broadcasting this were finished off, basically the United States violated the first, I think it's the first part of the Constitution. It's not even an amendment, it was like the first part of the Constitution, that is the freedom of speech. Then that literally, it's stealth stealing from the core of the United States that is incredibly risky, it's incredibly dangerous. It's probably not the first time it happens, but this is something that is going to shake Americans way more than they believe. This is my prediction, but it's going to be around 2030 where we're going to have the nodes again in Gemini and Sag, because right now it's more like the image of the country, the people, maybe Texas wants to separate, but we've gone through, like, Pluto has left the arena of the Pluto return for the United States, and while it's still in effect, that's it. Like, okay, there is still United States, but when we talk about what's to be, then we are still talking about something incredibly foundational that tends to the ascendant and descendant of the United States. And my prediction is around 2030, we're going to have harsh implications for breaking this amendment and not allowing to broadcast the forcible evacuation of those 10 cities of homeless people and turning them into concentration camps, because 2030 is about global concentration camps, okay? That is why it's so important, and every country has this differently. Now we can go to Palestine, we can understand that not seeing pride flags and not having women parties and not having women representing Palestinian people and mistreating women along the years and mistreating children made it very almost impossible from within, made it almost impossible to release themselves from occupation, okay, and to gain independence. Also, this thing of, free the entire region of Palestina, which is Israel and Palestine, and basically to genocide Israel. That's what it means. There is no gaslighting around it. Any Palestinian people that don't even get what the terminology is. So please learn about freeing the motherland in the ideologies of the 20th century, whether it's Nazi, whether it's fascist, whether it's Eretz Israel Shlema, okay? Like, you don't make these mistakes, because Israel was existing because the pragmatist won, and it got this particular land because with Uganda it would also be occupation. Okay, so that's it. You just needed some land for Israel, and that was the land they were connected with. And in Uganda, it would be considered occupation. So Palestinians also have a right to be here and to have their political entities and whatnot. The thing is that if your country is about the abolishing of the other country, then it causes this chain reaction where the fundamentalists of Israel now begin to have a legitimacy. And with the Holocaust, like, you really are awakening 500 years and even thousands of years sleeping bears. And this is Aries involved in the eclipse of the 7th of October. And we see the rise of anti-Judaism, which is called anti-Semitism. It's a mistaken name because ours are Semitic too, but we see the rise of anti-Semitism, and this is it's a part of the Aries cycle, but it's definitely not serving anybody to say free Palestine as genocide Israel, or marking the entire region as the desired region. We're not in the market. We're not bargaining for land, and even if we're doing it in this way, is not going to get the right result. What it is going to get is that the entire society of the world is going to wake up to the fact that Israel is protecting itself from being genocided through these measures and through the biblical saying of those who come to kill you, kill them first. And even though this is all just a mask and it's the Schwabland and it's not Israel and Palestine, it just doesn't look pretty. So if you're a Palestinian person, educate yourself on the origin of liberating the motherland in all nations. Understand that you don't want to repeat the mistakes of the fundamentalists in Israel, and act in favor of children's rights, women's rights, LGBTQ rights in your own community. This is going to liberate Palestine faster than a bullet. Because when we abolish the reasoning that this has been happening all along, which is not tending to the soil, not respecting women, not allowing diverse identities like diverse genders to exist in our community, which basically means abolishing shamans, because people who are two genders in many cases are quasi-shamans in their community. Not all cases, there are many genders, blah, blah, blah. But you need to know that this also has to do with the medicine in your area, okay? And so this is very important, okay? And when you say that gays are disease, then you can understand this leads to a lot of horrors that we see in the medical field. As I'm speaking, I'm getting more and more realization about this whole chemical process. So my advice to any person, to any community, including my own community, okay, is to speak up for children, speak up for women, speak up for LGBTQ. And this, when we tend to this, we're basically tending to what keeps us repressed, oppressed, infertile, and sick, okay? And of course, tend to elderly people, and to those that are misrepresented in society, so that we are more inclusive, and then you will have healthy society on healthy, fertile soil. And this is the point of interferences that we have, okay? This is the point of interference that we have. And this is, I believe in general, this is where the world is heading, okay? The transition phase is about things getting worse before they get better. And it's not nice to be on the things getting worse side. No, not at all. So being in a situation where I was with my parent in a city and we did not know if we are going to be invaded and evacuated or slaughtered or not, today, tomorrow, the next day, that was, and is, but definitely on this first week, that was quite quite a thing. And yes, you do have non-physical experiences of some of the things that people go through. So you don't know to explain this. I had this prior to the 7th of October. But yes, it's like the people who didn't go through this physically doesn't mean that they didn't feel certain things on their aura. And you think this is psychic attack, but then you find out that this actually happened to someone, and this is also true, and you're not imagining, you're not psychotic. This also happened to people who came to treat these people. So, like seeing snakes coming from out of from like behind the patient, and so on and so forth. And there was ritual sacrifice involved. So now that I talked about a lot of alchemy, let's see what is this Star of David. And this is going to happen on Friday, November 3rd. So just 2 days from now, we're going to have a bit of a Star of David forming. Now, you don't see it here because it includes the trine between Pluto and Uranus. So let's see, what is the Star of David? We're going to have the moon in the end phase of Cancer, trine in Mars in 15 degrees Scorpio, and trine in Mercury in particular in Scorpio, and trine in Neptune. So we're going to have a Scorpio, Neptune, Scorpio, Pisces, Cancer, water trine. And on the other direction, we're going to have an Earth trine between Uranus, Venus, Uranus in Taurus, Venus in Virgo. It's going to be in the 24th degree of Virgo, and Pluto in Capricorn. Okay, so we're going to have one triangle, one water grand trine with kind of Scorpio on top, and then we're going to have a one grand earth trine with Uranus in the bottom. And that happens when the ascendant is around Saturn here. Well, we're going to have various ascendants for this, but this is the Star of David astrology, which is also going to include a mystic rectangle between Venus, the Moon, Pluto, and Neptune. Okay, and almost like a hexagon there. And so I'm grateful for the Israeli astrology group for putting that into my attention. And what do we need to know about the Star of David? So the Star of David before Judaism or just any like religion is basically used to symbolize the female and the male in balance relations. Okay, there's a female and the male. It's kind of like an intercourse of the male and the woman. Okay, the triangle that with the upright is kind of like the penis, and the triangle going down is kind of like the vagina. It's kind of like penis in vagina, and then we have unity, balance, harmony, peace, and relaxation between the female and the male aspects in the universe. So this is a balance and harmony. In terms of the elements here, it's balance and harmony between the earth and the water. So this is what I see. I also didn't know it, but apparently the Star of David was also the astrological shape in the horoscope of King David. It did not assist him in not raping women, but so they say. Okay, so they say that was his astrology. So he's supposed to be balanced, but he also raped women. So I don't know how much of a balance that is. And that's a shape that we have. It's a transit. It's not a birth chart of anything. We have outer planets involved. We have all the outer planets involved. This Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus, except for Aries, which is going to be squaring the moon. And, well, there is supposed to be kind of a balancing rapport between the water and the earth signs, the water and the earth elements, and the outer planets and inner planets, okay, as well. It's kind of like they're both getting almost full representation. Again, it's a unique shape. It's not a birth chart. It's a transit. I don't know what to tell you about this, okay? Venus is going to be tightly opposing Neptune, so there can be disillusionment spiritually, but she is going to be trining Pluto. So the transformation is real, but it happens through idealism and disillusionment. And we're going to have Uranus opposing Mercury, but trining Pluto and trining Venus. So I'm not sure what will happen, but I said, well, it's a unique shape. People are probably wondering about this, so I am going to mention it. There is also going to be this mystic rectangle in the sky. A lot of alchemy, and you saw that before I even talked about this, I talked about a lot of alchemical understanding. So we can have alchemical understandings, deeper, almost shamanistic insight as to how to balance our world. We are heading towards the 2026 nice trine and sextile between Mercury, Neptune, and Uranus that is already in a very wide orb in action. So we are on the birthing of a new world in terms of the relations between the outer planets and themselves, which is a couple of hundreds of years a cycle. So that's fascinating. And at this moment in Friday, we get more insights as to how, perhaps as to the desired reality, how to balance things, how to alchemize the political conflict. It's probably going to be a good day to meditate. It's probably going to be a good day to, you know, I can't say manifest here because it is a decreasing moon, but it's a good time to get a lot of realization, cleansing, purging, and continuing on the vibe that I began this episode with, basically looking at the alchemy of the elements and the mundane situations between people. Nothing that I say is invented by me, okay? This is shamanistic wisdom. It's just like basic understanding. Earth, land, soil, women, air, fire, men. Okay. Mercury is the transition, children, doorways, the process of changing. So and the moon is also with mothers, caregiving, and the oceans, and you know, or the seas, or the quality of the water and the quality of emotion. So this is emotional caring between one another and to our children. That's also something that we need to tend to. And sun, of course, is, other than being fire, being centralized, intelligent, constant. Here's something constant, relatively constant in our lives. So being confident, shining, but I don't necessarily know how to, maybe pride, but I don't know. Like, but kind of like this is a good astrological election to continue on thinking about what is the generations or ancient wisdom and how is it applying modern times, and thinking about those things that we need to reform, whether it's like doing racism in a way that is biodiversity. It's like it's important to have willing consent and biodiversity as not a must, but you probably are not going to want to marry your cousin unless it's like very deep love and you both are very mixed in your traditions, in your ethnicities, for genetic reasons, okay? So while eugenics and purity of the race are actually degenerating the race, okay? So it's kind of like these thoughts, or thinking that gays are the reasons that we have flus and this and that and da. While we see that the general prohibition on gays is historically originated from the times that men and women were separated, and the only sex between adult and children that you would have would be from the same sex. Now that men and women are mixed also in schools, we understand that boys and girls are sexually harassed and violated in similar rates across the board up until around the age of 12. So, and the sex of the offender is not always the sex of the child, or the opposite sex. So we can't really say that pedophilia is linked to sexual preferences in terms of gender, okay? We can understand how people believe that if we only had pedophilia in situations where it was a man raping a boy or a woman raping a girl, then we would think that to be attracted, for a woman to be attracted to women is going to cause a person to be child offender, where it's nothing to do with that. Okay, but to notice we had a different historical context when boys and girls studied together and are mixed, and unfortunately this this was the way that we find out. So now we understand that gay is not pedophile. You can be gay and have no desire to have sex with children whatsoever, let alone act on any such thing. But in the past, we didn't know it, so we thought that if something terrible happens, it's probably because there are gays. Okay? Well, if we didn't have forced child marriages, perhaps it would be better for the climate altogether. So for the climate change altogether. So now we understand that it's not wrong to connect mundane events or political events or even weather events to social cohesion or the lack of, but we need to really get our mind set on the way that we do that, because if we pinpoint the wrong parameter, we both committed an atrocity against people, but we're also causing an imbalance in the entire kind of cosmic fabric that we're living in. And so, yes, there is a connection, but it's more likely if you mistreat children, then you will have difficulties to be liberated, whereas if you mistreat women, you might lose the land. Israel got invaded, literally, okay? Gaza, like, whoa. And this does not mean that the people who were the victims of the atrocities are in any way to blame. The other way around, it was the understanding that certain things need to be abolished from within so that we meet freedom halfway as it comes to our doorway. Okay, it is not because all people, not all people can be free. The other way around, all people can be free, and it's and then there are things, there are points of interferences that we can interfere in, we can tend to within our best abilities to meet freedom halfway and allow it in and meet freedom at the doorway and open the gate and clear the path. So we're preparing our soil for freedom, and then freedom we shall harvest, even if the process is non-linear and even if it's difficult to connect the dots. And that in the same thing does not mean that the people who died or the people who are had atrocities committed against them are in any way to blame. So I hope we can kind of get that. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye-bye.